January 23rd of 1984. He did also add in an odd tidbit about the Iran hostage crisis and claimed that Iran had 444 American hostages.
Iran had 444 American hostages, and they were keeping our Americans in.
Couple problems here. The Iran hostage crisis lasted 444 days from November 4th, 1979 to January 20th, 1981. So this event ended 3 years before Hogan wrestled the Sheik. Curiously, Hogan also doesn't mention this in either of his two books, despite discussing the match with the Iron Sheik in both of them. That being said, it's somewhat impressive that he was this close to getting it right. It's not like he said he asked George W. Bush to let him free the hostages with Hulkamania in 1989 or whatever he would normally say. Another odd moment from the interview came when Hogan was reminiscing about Andre the Giant and said that Andre couldn't use a knife or fork.
Never could hold a fork or a knife that he could work with.
This seems pretty ridiculous to me because it takes like 2 seconds to find multiple pictures of Andre using a fork and or a knife. There are several pictures of him using chopsticks, which would probably take significantly more manual dexterity for a man with hands his size. Maybe Hogan simply meant that it was more difficult for him than it would be for a person of normal size. But Hogan also repeated the lie that Andre was 7'4" and 650 pounds.
He's 7'4" and 650 pounds.
So, who knows? Either way, it's just another one of those weird cases of Hogan telling a story about a dead person who isn't there to give their account. During this same interview, Hogan brought up how, towards the end of his life, Roddy Piper was trying to surrender, then described how 2 days after Piper passed away, he received a voice message from Piper's number saying,
"I'm just loving you, my brother. I'm just walking with Jesus and loving you, my brother." I was like...
Now you might ask, would Roddy Piper really text something like that? Well, his phone did. In an interesting twist for Hogan, this actually did happen. Well, at least the voice message part did. He told this same story on A&E's WWE Legends and even played the clip.
"I saw the light. I'm walking with Jesus today, my brother. Walking with Jesus, loving you and praying for you."
Personally, I think the Roddy Piper story is a sort of exception that proves the rule. Hogan isn't lying 100% of the time, but when he makes an extraordinary claim, especially when involving someone else who is no longer alive, he has to provide extraordinary evidence to back it up. On the other hand, Hogan does editorialize a bit and suggests that Piper was curious about his faith.
He started asking me about my spirituality. He really didn't connect, but he was very curious,
I'm not going to psychoanalyze Hogan here or question his beliefs, mainly because, as I said earlier, I could turn that into a whole video by itself. But much of what Hogan said during this interview is about how surrendering to Christ allowed him to let go of his ego and shit like that, which is hard to take seriously when less than a year ago he was going on to numerous podcasts and lying left and right, even continuing to tell the lie about how one of his songs was inspired by a Make-A-Wish kid that tragically passed away. Before we finish the video, I want to return to the subject of the Hulkster in heaven, because shortly after I made my first Hulk Hogan video, somebody informed me of a clip that resurfaced earlier this year. For those of you who haven't watched my previous video, I'll try to sum up the Hulkster in heaven story fairly quickly. In 1995, Hogan released the album Hulk Rules by Hulk Hogan and the Wrestling Booth Band. On this album, there is a song about a fallen Hulkamaniac named Hulkster in Heaven. Over the years, Hogan has given varying origin stories for the song, but one point has remained consistent. According to the Hulkster, this story was inspired by an event that occurred at Wembley Stadium in 1992, where a Make-A-Wish kid passed away before he could watch Hogan wrestle. There are a number of problems with Hogan's story, though. Most notably, he never wrestled at Wembley Stadium in 1992. That being said, some new, old information has recently resurfaced that further contradicts this story. Earlier this year, the BBC Archive channel on YouTube uploaded an interview with Hulk Hogan from the TV show Pebble Mill that took place on March 31st of 1993. This date is extremely important, so I want you to remember it. During this interview, the subject of Hogan's upcoming musical projects was brought up, and what he said here is extremely interesting.
I said, man, let's write a song for all these kids, for all this crazy stuff that's happening in the world. And it's kind of like Eric Clapton's song, Tears in Heaven.
Aside from Hogan comparing his upcoming song to Eric Clapton's Tears in Heaven, there are some very important
Friendly's
details
going for
revealed.
Zone B.
Yeah, I was in my chiropractor's office, and I read People magazine when I read about this kid, James. And I couldn't comprehend children killing children. I mean, it was something that I understand a lot of things in life, but that's something I didn't understand. So
For the people from the UK, I imagine alarm bells and bright flashing red lights are going off, because there is only one story that could come to mind based on this time period and those details, that being the murder of James Bulger.
Hostiles on the scope in Zone B. Zone secured.
February 12th of 1993, 2-year-old James Bulger was abducted from a shopping center in Merseyside, England, by two 10-year-old boys, Robert Thompson and John Venables, who later took his life. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of this case because they aren't essential to this video. That said, this is one of the most infamous cases in UK history. It's still controversial to this day over 30 years later due to the nature of the crime and the fact that the perpetrators were so young, as well as the fact that both boys were given relatively short sentences and Thompson and Venables have been given multiple new identities over the years to protect them. With that in mind, it would be a f***ing insane thing for Hulk Hogan to claim he was going to write a song about that a month after it happened.
It's called Another Hulkamaniac in Heaven.
To try to contextualize this for my mostly American viewers, imagine John Cena going on to Good Morning America in late 2008 and saying he was going to make a tribute rap song about Kaylee Anthony. Are you beginning to understand how f***ing psychotic this situation is? At this point, some of you may be saying that Hogan didn't say the song was going to be about James Bulger specifically. Aside from the timeline of events and the details given by Hogan lining up perfectly with the case, I will grant you that there is a slim chance that wasn't what he was talking about. Nevertheless, I think it proves pretty conclusively that Hogan has been lying for decades when discussing the origins of Hulkster in Heaven. This interview took place in March of 1993, which is very crucial to the story. If Hogan really was inspired to write the song after meeting a Make-A-Wish kid who passed away at Wembley Stadium in 1992, then why is he telling an entirely different story during this interview? Furthermore, it also excludes the possibility that Hogan simply got the dates mixed up and the alleged encounter with a Make-A-Wish kid occurred during his 1994 Hulkamania tour with WCW, because he already had the idea for a version of Hulkster in Heaven a year prior. The Hulkster in Heaven story was already almost impossible, at least as Hogan described it, but this interview undermines every claim he's made about it over the years. Honestly, he may be lying here too. I think that's the most disturbing part of it, because now he's told two entirely different stories about how this song was inspired by the tragic death of children. And for what? Why do something like this? What did he have to gain? In my previous video, I talked about how Hogan's lies aren't all silly tall tales from an old man in his twilight years. Some of them have really disturbing implications for his character. I think it was bad enough that he tried to retrofit a narrative about a Make-A-Wish kid onto the Hulkster in Heaven song decades later. But this is far, far worse if you ask me. He was a month removed from his tragedy and already thinking of ways that he could exploit it for his own gain. It's hard to think of something more cynical and depraved. I don't have anything else to add to that, really. As always, I want to thank you for watching the video, as well as liking, commenting, and subscribing. And a special thank you to my supporters on Patreon who help make these videos possible. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is one of the most well-known and influential people in modern media. He was a successful and influential professional wrestler who went on to become one of the biggest movie stars of the last 20 years. He's also an enormously popular influencer on social media, with nearly 400 million followers on Instagram alone. And if he were to run for president, polls show that nearly half of Americans would consider voting for him. In short, Johnson is a ubiquitous figure in pop culture who is almost impossible to avoid. But there is a question about The Rock that simply can't be ignored. For years, rumors and speculation have swirled around him, and many people believe that at his age, his physique cannot be achieved or maintained naturally. With his brand increasingly being tied to his physique and his physique continuing to push boundaries year after year, the speculation only grows, and it shows no sign of stopping anytime soon. Before we delve too deeply into the rumors and speculation about Johnson, I think it's worth briefly going over how his physique has changed over the years, because it's rather interesting. If you look back to the time before his professional wrestling career when he was attempting to be a football player, you can see that he was a relatively big guy. It's not entirely surprising when you look at his father and his maternal grandfather, who were both large gentlemen. Johnson clearly has good genetics for size and athleticism. When he took up pro wrestling, he seemed to lose a little bit of his size though. He also looked softer than he would in
Friendly's
later
capturing
years.
Zone A.
Over the next half a decade or so, Johnson slowly and progressively leaned out, to the point that by the early 2000s he had some abs, as well as relatively noticeable definition in his shoulders and chest. 2001 was a particularly important year, because this was the year that Dwayne would make his big screen debut as the Scorpion King in The Mummy Returns. It was a pretty minor role, and he's mostly just a giant CGI man-scorpion monster, but it was soon followed by a role as the main character in a full-length movie about the Scorpion King. His physique didn't change much for this role, but if anything, I'd argue he put on a little weight and got a little less lean. Where this gets interesting is the next 5 years or so. You can actually see Johnson get progressively smaller, and not just getting leaner or more shredded. He's clearly losing mass. This downsizing is the most notable by around 2006 or 2007. Specifically in the movie The Game Plan, Dwayne looks considerably smaller in this role. In particular, his neck and traps seem to be much reduced in comparison to what they looked like before, but especially when compared to the Ninja Turtle-like traps he has these days, which must make it extremely difficult to find shirts that fit. His entire face also seems thinner, to the degree that if you do a side-by-side comparison with recent pictures of him, he looks almost unrecognizable. Looking at The Rock from the 2006 to 2007 era, I could be convinced that he's natural. He doesn't look abnormally large here. He kind of just looks like a guy in his 30s with good genetics who lifts regularly. And I have a theory for why. During this period of time, and basically up until 2010, Johnson wasn't taking many action roles. He was only in 3 action movies: The Rundown, Walking Tall, and Doom. Most of his roles were either dramas or comedies, and I wonder if he downsized to appear less intimidating for set roles. Johnson more or less confirmed this in later years, saying that when he got into Hollywood, he was told that he was too big and that he wouldn't make it if he kept his pro wrestling physique and persona. It's important to note that by this time, Johnson was already in his mid-30s, which is the point at which you've already hit your physical prime and things like testosterone levels begin to decline. But this is where it gets even more interesting, because as the late 2000s came and went, Dwayne started getting bigger again. So that by 2010 and 2011, he was arguably bigger than he had ever been up to that point. To lend further support to my theory about why Johnson downsized in the mid-2000s, his subsequent growth coincided with an increased number of roles in action movies, particularly joining the Fast and Furious franchise. This trend culminated in 2013 with the Michael Bay movie Pain and Gain, where Dwayne played a fictionalized version of famous bodybuilder Leonard Person, aka Big Lenny. Kidding aside, Johnson put on a significant amount of size for this role. Some of this is likely what is referred to as fluff, as he was lacking some definition, but just in terms of sheer size, I think this is the biggest he's ever been, and especially pronounced are his chest, shoulders, traps, and neck. Just compare his neck in these images to the shots from The Game Plan. It's night and day, and it's important to remember that he did this after 40 years old. More importantly, I think this was the moment when people started to notice Johnson's transformation. I remember back in the day, these pictures went a bit viral, and people were talking about just how big The Rock had become. In my opinion, this is also the point where Johnson's physique starts to become the focal point of his career. Following Pain and Gain, he will star in Hercules, where he spent most of the movie either shirtless or wearing something without sleeves. The lion's share, pun intended, of his roles since the mid-2010s have been action movies where he plays muscular guy who does something, muscular guy who chases Vin Diesel, muscular guy who flies a helicopter, muscular guy who trains a giant albino gorilla, muscular guy with a prosthetic leg, etc. This has created a bit of a sticky situation though. Unlike other actors who beef up for a role, Johnson can't just drop the weight afterwards. Since he is kind of just playing The Rock in those movies, and a major facet of The Rock is being jacked, he basically has to be like this full time. He has to maintain this physique, if not improve it. As he gets older, this becomes increasingly hard to believe, especially because he seems to be pushing his physique even further in recent years. It gets even more outlandish when you hear Johnson say that he's prioritizing longevity.
My priority is longevity.
I don't think anyone with any understanding of health or medicine would tell you that being nearly 280 pounds ripped would be good for your long-term health. The amount of mass is simply taxing on your entire body. If Johnson was prioritizing his health and longevity, he'd probably downsize back to his more svelte physique of the mid-2000s. rather than trying to get bigger and more ripped. This is where we get into the myth building of The Rock's persona, and it starts with his diet.
You haven't had candy since 1989.
Dwayne is so funny. He calls himself Rock Jemima in the kitchen.
Because when you talk about The Rock, his seemingly superhuman diet and workout regime is always at the forefront of the discussion. What The Rock eats, or at least what he says he eats, has stayed pretty consistent for about 10 years now.
My diet has honestly pretty much remained the same for the past 5 to 10 years.
When he was promoting Hercules back in 2014, he described what he somewhat jokingly called the 12 labors diet. As he detailed on Twitter, this meal plan consists of 7 meals. Meal 1, a 10-ounce filet with 4 egg whites and 5 ounces of oatmeal or cream of wheat, measured dry. Meal 2, 8 ounces of chicken, 2 cups of white rice, 1 cup of broccoli. Meal 3, 8 ounces of halibut, 2 cups of white rice, 1 cup of asparagus. Meal 4, 8 ounces of chicken, a 12-ounce baked potato, and a cup of broccoli. Meal number 5, 8 ounces of halibut, 1.5 cups of white rice, and 1 cup of asparagus. Meal number 6, an 8-ounce filet, 9-ounce baked potato with salad. And meal number 7, 30 grams of casein protein and 10 egg whites scrambled with onions, peppers, and mushrooms. It's hard to tell how serious this diet actually was because he also included 1 cup of fresh Nemean lion blood. Who does this guy think he is, Liver King? Actually, now that I think about it, what is it with guys with the last name Johnson? There's also that translucent billionaire who's trading blood with his children. Maybe that's a subject for another video. Over the last decade, Johnson has wavered very little when describing his eating habits, except for changing his fish up from halibut or cod to salmon for some nebulous health reason.
Just recently transitioned my cod meals of the day to salmon, which I hate, by the way. I hate salmon, but it's a great fish in terms of your health and fitness.
As well as eating buffalo instead of steak sometimes. Maybe he includes some blueberries or whatever, but the general outline is the same. 6 to 7 meals.
I do eat 5 to 6, sometimes 7 meals a day.
A protein, a carb, and some kind of veggie most of the time.
10 ounces of bison, a cup and a half of white rice again. With some greens, I'll have a salad.
Or maybe even a sweet potato sometimes. Usually a protein, and that one is usually chicken.
Like a rice, as well as chicken breast. I'll have some greens.
If you're at all familiar with movie star diets, you'll recognize this as a slightly more diverse version of the chicken, broccoli, and rice diet that so many celebrities claim to use when they need to bulk up.
Brown rice, grilled chicken, broccoli.
Chicken, fish, steak, steamed vegetables, and occasionally some brown rice. It was about 9 months of chicken breast and broccoli and
Domination.
training. But at
I'll
least
take
2
3
rotisserie
objectives
chickens
on
a
your
day
off stack.
myself.
Assault them at your
It's similarly
discretion.
hard to believe for a number of reasons. The first is the one that should be the most obvious to anyone.
3,
Dwayne Johnson is
2,
worth like $1 billion.
1.
He
Your
has a
mission is
personal
to
chef
secure
and
the
a
capture zone.
nutritionist who work
Friendlies
with his
capturing
strength and
Zone A.
conditioning coach.
There's a handful of chefs who I work with, and I have one advisory
Capture
chef
zone secured.
who speaks to them.
Johnson can afford to have thousands of pounds of his personal gym equipment shipped to wherever he's filming. He's not a regular
Friendly's
person who
going
has
for
to
Zone
think
B.
about what he's going to eat 7 times a day. It's delegated to other people. He doesn't need to be eating like a bro science lifter on a budget. He
Zone
could, and
secured.
let's be honest, probably is eating a way more diverse and delicious diet than something Jason Genova could make in the microwave. There are zero logical or logistical reasons for him to be eating basically the same 3
Hostiles
meals
on the
every
scope in
day of his
Zone B.
life, except for his supposedly epic cheat days. The second problem is that it just doesn't make sense. And I'm not the first person to point this out either, but in recent years, The Rock has claimed to eat about 6,000 calories a day.
It's probably somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 calories a day. That anywhere between 6 to, well, I would say possible, almost 8,000 calories a day.
That doesn't add up. Like, literally. Just stop and think about it for a second. If he's eating 6,000 calories a day and eating 6 to 7 meals per day, each meal would have to be pushing
But
1,000
you're a pro.
calories.
You'll bounce
And if you
back.
just look at something like his Hercules diet plan, it just doesn't approach those numbers.
It's a carb, either rice or a sweet potato, and some chicken.
Capture Zone A
You
is
think
at
that's
risk.
also going to be over 1,000 calories? Bit of rice and some chicken? Doesn't sound like he's well on his way to 6,000 to 8,000 calories now, does it?
Just to put things into perspective, 6,000 calories is as much, if not more food than Mr. Olympia winning mass monsters like Jay Cutler and Ronnie Coleman were eating while bulking.
I'd buy a whole cow at a time. I was eating probably 4 pounds of meat a day, but I'd buy 150 pounds of chicken at a time. I'd buy 30 dozen eggs, so I'd buy a whole case of eggs.
I don't look forward to eat anything. If you ask me what my favorite food is, I don't have a favorite food. I don't like to eat anything. There's nothing specific that I like.
The Rock isn't bulking though, which we know because his trainer has said that he can't put on the extra fat due to his demanding acting schedule. So where are all of those extra calories going? And to be fair, he's not the only one to make these claims. Early last year, Hugh Jackman said that he was eating around 5,000 calories per day to bulk up to play Wolverine again in Deadpool 3.
I complain about it all day long. I'm in this thing right now where I'm eating 5,000 calories a day. I'm just loading, eating.
Then a month later, he tweeted out his meals for the day that allegedly totaled over 8,000 calories, if you want to believe that. I'm not going to break out the compilation, but over the years we've heard so many actors discuss these supposedly enormous amounts of food they need to eat and the drastic lengths they need to go to consume it, such as blending up meat smoothies like they're fucking Marcus Rule or something.
So I would just put it into a blender,
Gathering intel,
and just drink chicken. Isn't that gross?
It makes you ask the question, why? I think there are a few reasons. The first is the simplest. It gives them something to talk about during interviews, and it's publicity for the movie.
When you go on a diet of Superman, what does Superman eat?
They can say they've been working harder than ever. They've been eating more, and they're going to be even more jacked than they were the last time. The second reason is because they can get away with it. And by them, I mean the movie industry. They know the average person doesn't know what 1,000 calories of food looks like. Never mind 8,000 calories of healthy food. And you can even fudge the numbers with those crazy epic cheat meal days that kind of just look like normal, if slightly decadent meals. I mean, we're not talking about Brian Shaw wood chippering over 23,000 calories in a day. It's like 2 burgers and some fries, or a large portion of sushi. The average person heard one time 10 years ago that Michael Phelps ate 10,000 calories worth of Subway sandwiches every day to win the Olympics. So why wouldn't The Rock be eating 6,000 calories to play a comic book character? Even assuming he really was eating 6,000 calories a day, the question is still, why? What is he doing that requires him to eat that much? This is where we cross over into Johnson's workouts. The problem here is that it's hard to know what he actually does in the gym. There is a lot of footage of The Rock training, but it's difficult to say whether they're really part of his routine or if it's just something flashy or different for Instagram. If you Google The Rock's workout plan, you'll come across countless breakdowns from official and unofficial sources, going back over a decade. Similar to his diet, it's hard to know what to make of any of these workout plans because while they may look normal at first glance, they begin to make less sense when you look at the details. For reference, I'm going to use the workout plan Johnson used to get into shape for Black Adam. First, because this information came out fairly recently. Additionally, I think this is the craziest his physique has ever looked. He's as close to his peak size as ever, but also considerably more defined. Johnson also claimed that this was the hardest undertaking of his career. Around the time that Black Adam came out, Johnson's coach and business partner, Dave Rienzi, posted the plan that they used to prepare for the movie on Instagram. You can see from these breakdowns that Johnson was doing at least 5 major movements for each muscle group, with each movement consisting of 3 to 4 sets of 10 to 12 reps, with some lifts getting up into the 20-plus rep range. We also know that he's training 6 days a week, and this is actually up from what he was doing even in his mid-40s.
Generally train about 5 days a week. And then there's 2 days off, so sometimes there's 2 days off.
This is a level of volume and frequency that is on par with what a lot of top bodybuilders do. And certainly some of the greats like Dorian Yates have managed to get by with lower rep ranges and less frequency. I don't know exactly what kind of weight Johnson is using for a lot of these movements, but he is a guy who says that 275 pounds for 8 reps on incline bench is not too heavy because he has a reconstructed shoulder. So just to recap a bit, Johnson is training as frequently as some of the greatest bodybuilders of all time did in their prime, while eating as much as they did during a bulk without gaining any extra fat, and he's doing this while totally natural in his 40s and 50s. This is where we come to that elephant in the room. Even being generous to Dwayne Johnson, it would be highly improbable that he is natural. Yes, he obviously has good genetics. He's also definitely a hard worker who spends a lot of time in the gym. But no matter how good your genetics are and how hard you work, there are limitations to the human body. You simply don't peak in your late 40s and early 50s without some kind of assistance, especially if you were already in incredible shape to begin with. And by his own admission, he's had numerous injuries over the years.
I'm like the Bionic Man. Got surgery.
What Dwayne Johnson is trying to get us to believe is that somehow he's defying basically everyone's understanding of biology and sports science and getting bigger and bigger as he gets older and older. Many people have accused The Rock of using steroids, most notably Joe Rogan, who has called him out multiple times, yet was strangely reluctant to broach the subject when Johnson appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience. We can only guess as to why Joe was unwilling to confront Johnson face to face, but the issue of PEDs is something Dwayne has generally avoided talking about. One of, if not the only times he has spoken on the issue was during an interview from 2009, in which he admitted that he and his friends experimented with steroids in their late teens when they were football players. In my opinion, the question of whether or not The Rock is using steroids is actually less interesting than the question of could he even admit he was if he wanted to. We know that Hollywood has kept the lid on the PED issue for a long time, and there are obvious reasons why. Most of the roles that these actors are doing insane transformations for are comic book movies, and their audiences are, at least in large part, children. The optics aren't great if the actor playing the hero in your $300 million baby movie admits that they're taking steroids. I think it's inevitable that this wall will start breaking down at some point, though. When so many of the people going through these superhero body transformations are increasingly in their 40s and even 50s, they can't avoid the issue forever. We've seen a small number of actors, such as Alan Ritchson, admitting to using TRT to achieve the body he had in Jack Reacher. He's also gotten even bigger for season 2, so you can come to your own conclusions about whether that's all he's taking, though. As it becomes more and more normalized to manipulate your hormone levels like this, I think it's just a matter of time before these aging stars begin to come out and admit to using HRT. For The Rock, I think it's a bit more complicated. There was probably a window for him, sometime 8 to 10 years ago, where he could have come out and said that he was starting some form of HRT as he was getting older. And I honestly doubt anyone would have really cared. However, he's waited so long that he's kind of painted himself into a corner here. So much of Johnson's brand has become about hard work. He calls himself the hardest worker in the room.
We got a saying, which is you want to be the hardest worker in the room, you also want to be the smartest one.
A term which has even made it into his Project Rock apparel. As I said earlier, he obviously does work hard. You can't look the way he does without working hard and being extremely dedicated. But you also can't look at The Rock for a number of other reasons. He's incredibly wealthy. He has access to resources he couldn't dream of that make things much easier for him.
I generally set up a gym, a private gym, rent out the warehouse, rent the equipment, ship the equipment. So just so by the time I get into the location, I'm ready to work. It's the operation.
Personally, I think that's why he tries to put forward such a Spartan image when it comes to things like his diet and workouts. It is to convince people that they can achieve it too if they just work hard enough. You just have to get up at 3:30 a.m., lace up your Project Rock shoes, have a Zoe energy drink, and step into the Iron Paradise. For The Rock to admit he's been enhanced or to say he's going to start taking something now would kind of be a betrayal to the people who have bought into his message. It does make me wonder, though. You can make the argument that Johnson has been a net positive, regardless of whether you believe he's natty or not. His philosophy has inspired potentially millions of people to improve their health and fitness. But it is also a double-edged sword to tell people that they can do anything if they just work hard enough. You can't. It also takes genetics, innate talent, and sometimes just sheer luck. When people run up against the wall of reality, they often end up discouraged or feel like a failure because they didn't quote-unquote work hard enough. I'm not saying The Rock specifically is responsible for everyone's insecurities or frustrations, and he's not as bad as someone like Chris Hemsworth, who actually sold a fitness app based on his physique, but it's still part of a systemic issue plaguing the fitness industry, social media, and the entertainment industry, and he does have a part in that. Even if you genuinely believe that Johnson is natural, he's still cultivating an image that doesn't represent reality. One that gets harder and harder to believe with each passing year. If nothing else, it makes you wonder how long he can keep this up. I mean, let's look 10 years into the future. Is he going to be doing this in his 60s? Is he going to be doing it in his 70s? How much will he weigh by then? 400 pounds? How many calories will he be eating? 9,000 or 10,000? Will he claim he's working out 8 days a week like Hulk Hogan, saying he wrestled 400 days in a year? And at what point does the general population's appetite for this dwindle? When do they go, okay, Dwayne, enough is enough? I don't know. As I said at the beginning, Dwayne Johnson is one of the biggest figures in all of modern pop culture. He's a juggernaut, and it's almost unfathomable to think that he will stop or even slow down anytime soon. Realistically, how could he stop if he even wanted to? What is the off-ramp for this perpetual cycle of constantly trying to one-up himself or find those higher gears? As much as he's setting these unrealistic standards, he's also being held to them, or more accurately, being made to one-up them.
So I asked him to remove the muscle padding. Plus also, I was putting in a lot of work. I wanted to transform my body for the role.
He's now stuck in this feedback loop where his career is based on his physique, and his physique has to keep getting bigger to sustain it. How many franchises is he a part of? How many brands is he associated with or outright owns? It all comes back to his godlike physique and his ability to sustain this, if not increasingly up the ante. And this isn't me trying to say, oh, poor Dwayne Johnson, the billionaire movie star, he can't stop being jacked. But the truth is, as impactful as Johnson is, he's also somewhat a victim of his own success. As I've said in regards to Liver King, it's easy to single out one person and criticize him. And there are certainly valid reasons to criticize The Rock. But the truth is, these industries and communities are much bigger than any one person. It illustrates how even someone as big and famous as Dwayne Johnson is still under pressure to maintain an impossible standard. When you think about it like that, you start to question how anyone can avoid feeling that kind of pressure. I think this is especially true of young people who have rightly come to believe that everyone in the fitness industry is lying about being natural. And honestly, they probably are. It's harder now than ever to know who is natural and who is not. You have to take everything everyone says with a grain of salt and assume they are lying to you for some financial gain. And in that light, you can easily see how somebody could become disillusioned with the idea that anyone they see on social media is natural, and then come to the conclusion that they themselves need to start taking steroids if they want to make any progress. To me, that is the biggest issue with the fitness industry and entertainment industry as a whole. It's usually the most insecure and impressionable people who are being deceived. Until there is total transparency from everyone involved, this problem will never go away. This video was just something a little bit different. Sometimes I have an idea or thought that comes around in my mind for a while and I want to talk about it without making a crazy in-depth video. I would like to make more of these shorter one-off style videos in the future when the mood strikes me or I have an idea that has been lingering in the back of my mind for a while. So look forward to those, I guess. As always, I want to thank you for watching the video, as well as liking, commenting, and subscribing. And a special thank you to my supporters on Patreon who help make these videos possible. Thank you. Squirt, Poncho Villa, Jonas Namenson, Rusty Shackelford, Jackson, Fightback CBD, Mike Roballs, Bone CK, Scott Richmond, Fisherman666, Random Candor, Fuzi Eunice, Dot Old Neon, Timothy Lee Peterson, Julius. If you're a long-time viewer of my channel, you probably know I'm not big on doing follow-up videos. But occasionally, if there is an interesting development in the story of someone or something that I've already covered, I feel inclined to make a video about it. Such is the case with Liver King. In the 9 or so months since I made my first This is a video I've been thinking about making for over a year, but up until recently I struggled to find the reason to do so. Funnily enough, I actually came across Liver King back in October of 2021, before he had gained the massive social media.
Zone C compromised.
If you're a long-time viewer of my channel, you probably know I'm not good at doing follow-up videos.
I think we all see where this is heading. Time to think about extraction options. Allies on B.
Gathering intel. Feel inclined to make a video about. Such is the case with the Liver King. In the 9 or so months since I made my first video, his content has become increasingly bizarre, and online commentators have noticed what appears to be a change in his health. With that in mind, I've decided to return to the strange world of the Liver King. But before we get into that, if you enjoy this video, please consider leaving a like or a comment, as this will help my channel out in the eternal struggle against the algorithm. But without further ado, here we go. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Liver King, I did make a 40-minute video covering most of the essential information that I will link in the description. Nevertheless, I will give a brief recap. Brian Johnson, aka Liver King, is a supplement salesman and social media influencer who took the internet by storm from late 2021 to late 2022. He did this through a highly crafted social media campaign in a pro wrestling style persona. His videos frequently featured him consuming large quantities of animal products, specifically raw beef liver, or engaging in other over-the-top stunts like shooting a bed with a tank. During these videos, Johnson preached his message or philosophy for a better life, known as the 9 Ancestral Tenets. Over time, though, people logically began to question if this massively muscled, incredibly red man was on PEDs. For a time, this became the most talked about subject in the fitness community. Initially, Liver King addressed the topic indirectly by doing humorous skits. However, he would later claim that he was in fact natural.
You've never taken steroids?
Never taken steroids. I've never done PEDs other than prioritize, execute, and dominate in life.
These claims would eventually come back to bite him when in late November, Derek of the More Plates, More Dates YouTube channel made a video exposing Johnson. In the video, Derek revealed several emails that had been leaked to him by a PED coach, later revealed to be the YouTuber Vigorous Steve, where Johnson admitted to taking tens of thousands of dollars worth of pharmacy-grade performance enhancers every month.
To be honest, I know bodybuilders who compete at the Open Mr. Olympia who use less pharma-grade GH than that. Like that's how high of a dose that actually is.
In the wake of the expose, Johnson actually owned up to the truth and went on to several podcasts where he spoke about his PED use fairly candidly and also expressed a desire to go natural. That more or less catches us up to where we left off. Since last year, several important developments have happened in the story of the Liver King. The most notable turn of events came earlier this year when Johnson allegedly stood by his word and quit all of his PEDs cold turkey. No PCT, no HRT, just quitting the roids and replacing them with a pound of raw bull testicles per day.
I'm transitioning on 1 raw testicle a day.
I say allegedly here because unless I've missed something, Johnson didn't provide any verifiable evidence of his lifestyle change. According to Johnson, he began his journey on January 2nd of 2023.
January 2nd was my last dose, and I don't know what the future has in store, other than I've made an earnest commitment to give it my best fucking effort.
And over the following months, he would periodically post updates of his natty journey, dubbed Liver King 2.0.
Liver King 2.0, 70 days.
These mostly consisted of physique updates and or comparisons to what he looked like prior to starting this experiment. In addition to posts on his various social media accounts, Liver King would also document his journey through a series of confessional posts on his own website, which, as a side note, has become increasingly confusing and difficult to navigate. But that is neither here nor there. Unfortunately, these confessionals only started in July, which some of the Isaac Newtons among you will have noted is over 6 months after he went natty. LK did provide some general stats about his health, like heart rate and blood sugar levels, as well as his performance on various lifts and so-called Liver King benchmark workouts. The problems here are manifold, though. First, it's hard to say much about his progress or decline based on the stats he provided, particularly as it pertains to his workouts. partially because the workouts differ from update to update, but also because we have an incomplete picture of the data. A lot can affect your performance on any given workout or even specific lifts from day to day, let alone from week to week. This is especially true considering Johnson mentions being sick and dealing with injuries, so without long-term logs to compare to, it's difficult to draw any real conclusions from these numbers. Add to this the fact that you basically just have to take his word for it when it comes to the stats he's provided. As far as I can tell, there has been no documentation or blood tests shown to confirm these claims. You either trust the stats provided by Liver King or you don't. That's going to be a big hurdle for a lot of people given his past history of withholding information. The issue isn't really helped by the fact that at times it seems like he's trolling some of these stats. I mean, how are we supposed to take this seriously when you say your chest measurement is big and your body fat is shredded? I know Liver King is a bit of a troll, but if this was supposed to be an earnest attempt to document his natty journey for transparency's sake, he was doing himself no favors. Even though I'm trying to give him the benefit of doubt here, it does make me question the sincerity of these confessionals and the attempt at a natty journey as a whole. This brings me to my next point. In his August 5th confessional, Johnson admitted that he was considering ending the Liver King 2.0 experiment and getting on a regimen of hormone replacement therapy, specifically testosterone cream as well as human growth hormone. Why? Well, as he explained, his hormones were all over the place from eating raw bull testicles as a replacement for steroids. To quote Johnson, "Until you try eating 1 full fucking pound of fresh raw bull testicles a day for over 200 consecutive days and taking them everywhere you go, I don't want to hear it." End quote. Also, as previously noted, injuries were apparently a problem. He would go on to explain that he's a Liver King, not Liver Caveman, before going on one of his rants about the evolutionary hunter using technology to shape and create the life he wants. Finally, he ended his confessional by saying, quote, "I've made my natty point, proud AF doing it, and I'm gonna live my life by my terms. Having said that, the second I apply a cream or take a shot of HGH, it will be posted here with full transparency. Who knows, it may be as early as next week." End quote. As it turns out, it would only take Liver King another 5 days to make his decision. In his August 20th confessional post, Liver King announced that he had decided to end the Liver King 2.0 experiment after 220 days natty, once again citing the difficulty of eating a pound of testicles a day as well as the recurring injury issues. Further, he stated, "I've proven to myself what I needed to prove, and I see the utility of this technology, and I'm using it again to optimize." End quote. The timing of this post would end up being quite intriguing. In the days leading up to August 20th, one of Liver King's videos had been making the rounds on social media. In the video, LK creates primal cereal by filling the bowl with the milk and raw testicles, plus a dash of his protein shake mix, you know, just for a little extra flavor.
I got my testicles in farm fresh milk from Liver King Ranch. The most feared warriors, the Maasai. What they get down on is milk, meat, and blood. And they're expressing the higher, more dominant form.
Aside from how gross the video is, which is kind of saying something for a Liver King video, many viewers were struck by the surprising turn in Liver King's appearance. I mean, the guy has always been the same color as those pickled sausages you can only buy in a jug that's in that weird part of the store with the giant containers of condiments. In this video, he looked particularly like a 90s wrestler on the back end of their career, if you know what I mean. The comparison to Larry the Lobster has been made a few times, but he actually looked like he had been slightly boiled in this video. But more importantly, the dude just looked haggard, like he had aged 20 years in a couple months. It really looked like the guy's health had taken a turn for the worse. After this video circulated for a while, the internet's favorite middle-of-the-road commentator, Penguin Zero, aka Critical, aka Charlie, made a video about the situation. In this video, Critical made several critiques of Liver King, largely related to LK deceiving his fans by leading them to believe that they could look like him if they followed his ancestral lifestyle.
And he would keep telling them, like, if you work hard, you buy my shit, you eat like me, you live like me, following the ancestral tenets, you can be like me, look like me.
When in reality, Johnson's physique came from abusing steroids.
And it was all completely a lie. Turns out he was juiced to the gills, he was on tons and tons of performance-enhancing products.
More broadly, Critical criticized the nebulous nature of Liver King's ancestral living philosophy, because ultimately you can interpret Johnson's logic of the evolutionary hunter using technology to seek out their best life as justifying any modern convenience.
There is no way he'd be able to hunt for all of that. The only reason he's able to eat like he does in these videos is because he is indulging in the modern excess. He is doing nothing even remotely associated with living primal. Being on a private jet is the furthest possible thing from primal living, and some of his audience even called him out, saying, you know, our private jet's primal. So he just comes up with some arbitrary excuse on why it's totally fine. So he says, a true primal left the comfort of the cave for adventure and a better life. Flying private falls squarely in the better life department. What a cop-out.
And in that light, what does primal really even mean anymore? Is eating processed frozen chicken tendies you cooked in the microwave primal because you can put that time and effort you would have spent cooking into something else, like bonding or sleeping or working harder? Most importantly, Critical argued that he believed Liver King was back on gear, citing the changes to his appearance as well as mood and energy levels present in recent videos.
But anyway, I do think he's upped his usage of the PEDs. It seems like he is in a much different state now than he was 8 months ago, and not for the better.
A few days later, the fitness community's most genetically elite YouTuber, Greg Doucette, threw his 2 cents into the conversation, as he often does. While Coach Greg mostly reiterated points made by Critical, he offered some interesting insights into the consequences and negative health effects present when somebody both gets off and also gets back on gear.
Aside from potentially making you look older, when you abuse steroids, it can also make your organs age more quickly. And so on the inside, the Liver King, due to all the things he's been doing, he's getting older. The older he gets, the more muscles going on. And so if he wants to look the same or get better, he can't just take away the steroids. He have to up the doses.
For a time, things were quiet. But then on September 1st, Liver King addressed the videos made by Charlie and Coach Greg. In my opinion, this is actually one of Johnson's most level-headed and reasonable videos. He stated forthrightly that he is back on PEDs because he didn't like losing weight and strength during the 220 days that he was off them.
I don't like the idea of losing over 20 pounds of muscle. I don't like the idea that became the reality of losing a lot of strength, so I've decided to go back on it.
He also rebutted Critical's claim that Liver King was deceiving his followers into thinking that if they used his products and followed his lifestyle, they would look like him.
I've never said, taking my supplements, you're gonna look like me. What I have said is, make sure to get the early morning sun, get your body connected, grounded, anchored into the earth, so that you can express your highest and most dominant form.
It's almost like you've done this
to
before.
express your potential, not to look like Liver King.
If I try to be unbiased here, I can sort of see what Johnson is saying. As far as I recall, I don't remember hearing him ever say that taking his products would make you look like him. And if I'm being honest, you would have to be pretty dumb to believe they would. On the other hand, there is obviously an implication here. When you make yourself, an incredibly jacked dude, the face of your line of supplements and fitness philosophy, and you attribute your physique to these 9 ancestral tenets, what conclusion are people supposed to draw from that?
Because of the implication.
I think a better critique of Johnson would be that he was pushing his products as effectively a panacea, as well as presenting his message of the 9 ancestral tenets as a solution to the overarching societal problems plaguing the modern world, not convincing people that they would be jacked if they ate powdered bull nuts. But I digest. Liver King would also go on to address the complaints related to the fact that he flies in private planes and uses technology, but it's basically the same statement he's given a few times when the matter has been brought up. I think more interesting is how he reiterated some points he had made in the past about how ancestral living helped him improve his life and saved his kids. As a result, he felt like he had to share this message with as many people as he could.
And so I'm thinking, okay, I gotta respond.